Hello knitting friends, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and we're going to look at a really fun new stitch today. It's called the Dimple Stitch. And if you look at this beautiful stitching, you'll see the little dimples in the stitch pattern, and it is quite of a thick, plush, kind of 3D looking pattern. This is the front side, the back side looks really nice too. So I am knitting this stitch into a baby blanket, but I think it would make also a very beautiful scarf or a hat or anything where you want something really nice and thick and plush with a really fun stitch definition. So let's get started learning this fun dimple stitch. Okay, if you want to follow along with the baby blanket pattern for the stitch, I will have a link to that in the description below, and I'll share with you how many stitches I cast on, the dimensions of the blanket, etc. But for this stitch, for right now, I am using a bulky weight yarn and a size US 13 needle. I think this stitch would knit up really nice as well in a lighter weight yarn and a smaller needle, but this is what I chose to make this blanket. I think it makes for a really nice chunky look. So let's take a look at how to do this stitch. I did notice when I first started it too that this stitch does tend to curl a little bit on the edges, so to help prevent that, I did do a little 3-row or a 3-stitch garter border for the edge. So each row that I'm going to be using for this blanket starts and ends with 3 knit stitches, but that is not part of the actual pattern. So let's take a look first at row 1. Row 1, for me, I'm going to start with these 3 knit stitches, which is just really a part of that garter stitch border that I'm using. And now here we start the pattern. So the very first stitch is going to be a knit stitch. Knit 1 stitch. Then the second stitch in this 2-stitch repeat is with the yarn in back, keep the yarn in back, slip that stitch as if to purl. So just slip it as if to purl, very easy. And that's the 2-stitch repeat we'll do to the end of the row. Knitting 1, with yarn in back, slip the next stitch. Fast and easy. Knit 1, yarn in back, slip the next stitch. So we will do that all the way across row number 1. All right, I've completed row 1, and now we're going to go on to row number 2. Now, by the way, this is an 8-row repeat pattern, but don't worry, there is a lot of repetition in this, so you will quickly have this memorized in your head and you'll be able to knit this really fast. It really is quite of a fast knit project, which is nice for a blanket. So my row number 2 is again starting with 3 knit stitches. And by the way, don't forget to do those 3 knit stitches at the end of each row too. So stop your knitting the pattern when you get to 3 stitches to the end and knit those 3 stitches if you are adding a garter stitch border like I am right here. So the very first stitch is a slip stitch, but with the yarn in front. So with the yarn in front, we're going to slip the stitch as if to purl, just like we did the last row, but now we have the yarn in front. And then the next stitch is going to be a purl stitch. So there's our 2-stitch repeat. Keep the yarn in front, slip, and then purl. It's really nice because you're keeping the yarn in front for both the slip stitches and the purl stitches, so there's no yarn moving up and back. Slip, yarn in front, and purl. So let's do that now all the way to the end of the row, and then add those 3 knit stitches at the end. All right, with row 2 complete, we can now move on to rows 3 and 4, which are very easy to do. Row 3 is going to just be knit all the stitches. So we're just going to knit across the entire row, including of course those first 3 and last 3 stitches. And then row 4 is going to be purling all stitches. So on the way back we will purl all except for those first 3 and last 3 stitches we will knit for our border. So rows 3 and 4, very simple. Knit all and then purl all, and then we'll jump to row 5. All right, let's move on to row 5 of this 8-row repeat pattern for this dimple stitch. And row 5 and 6 are very similar to rows 1 and 2, but we are just reversing the order of those 2-stitch repeat. Okay, so row 5, instead of starting with a knit stitch like we did in row 1, we are going to start with a slip stitch. So with yarn in back, slipping that first stitch, and then knitting. So just reversing the sequence of those 2 stitches. So slip stitch with the yarn in back, then knit, slip, and knit. And we will do that across the entire row. All right, let's continue on to row 6, which is also very similar to row 2, but again, we're just reversing the order of that 2-stitch repeat. So we'll start again with our 3 stitches for the border. Now for row 6, instead of starting with the slip stitch like we did in row 2, we are going to start with a purl stitch. So we're going to purl the first stitch, and then with the yarn in front, slip that next stitch, then purl, slip, etc. Do that 2-stitch repeat to the end, and then we will wrap up with rows 7 and 8. All right, let's wrap up with the last 2 rows, rows 7 and 8, which are again the very easy rows, and row 7 is just going to be knit all again, just like we did previously, and then row 8 is going to be purl all. So we'll just finish with those last 2 rows, knitting and purling, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to knit this stitch into the blanket. I'll give you some specific instructions on that as well. Okay, so we knitted up our 8 rows, which shows you how to do this really pretty dimple stitch. So now I will just give you a little bit of instructions on how I am completing this stitch into a baby blanket. As I mentioned previously, I am using a size US 13 needle and a really long circular needle, and that's just needed to accommodate all the stitches that we're going to need for this blanket. I am also using a bulky weight yarn. I picked this up at Michael's Charisma brand, and the color is Mist. So a really pretty gray color and nice soft bulky plush yarn. Now to start, I cast it on 80 stitches, and that will produce about a 28-inch wide blanket. Now you can make your blanket narrower or larger if you like, just cast on more or less stitches, but make sure it's an even number of stitches to accommodate this stitch. And then I also did, for the start of the blanket, I did a garter stitch border on the start of it as well. I did 4 rows of knit stitches for that garter stitch, and I will do that before I cast off as well, and that's just going to help it from curling too much at the end. Of course, I will block this when I am done too, because it's already curling a little bit, but I think blocking will smooth it out nicely. So that is this pretty dimple stitch. Again, I think it will make a beautiful scarf or hat or any other project. Just be creative and let me know in the comments what you make with this pretty stitch. So I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please give me a like, and then don't forget to subscribe to receive notifications from Jack Knits on new videos all about knitting tips and stitches and creative patterns. Thanks for watching, everyone. Happy knitting.